how surprised would that little kid be by what you've done?
Very, very shocked. Yeah, never imagined in a million years I would be involved in any of this because, I was hoping to become a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I never, thought I'd be involved in the military or police work. But I just found something that, I just had a calling for, and I had no idea. I was clueless. I thank my grandfather, very, religious person, gave me a lot of wisdoms. And that's what, that's what really keeps me grounded.
Welcome to the UMGC podcast, Unstoppable Stories, with your host, Lauren Cardillo.
Today, I'm joined by Maurice Hicks, former police officer, military vet, author, dad, and UMGC grad. Welcome, Maurice.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I just finished your book.
Really?
And so for people who think they know Baltimore through like Homicide or The Wire, tell me what like your childhood was like growing up in Baltimore.
Sure. My childhood, I would say it like this. While other children would go in their backyard and play with their swing sets, I would go outside and see people shooting up heroin in a heroin den across the street from where I live. See this pretty much every day. A lot of crime, a lot of violence. Yeah, so I would describe it growing up living under siege.
But you were also sort of in a house that in certain ways was a little oasis, in the sense that you loved education, you did lots of things with your family. How did that sort of change your outlook?
Yeah, well, I would say, it started out when I was about 10 years old, and my mother married this gentleman who pretty much didn't care for me. And I had a little brother that was his pride and joy. So he started saying things to me like, you're dumb, you'll never amount to anything. His motto was pretty simple: never take care of another man's responsibility. And I was that responsibility. I wasn't allowed to be in any family photos. He wouldn't buy me food or anything like that. So eventually I got frustrated with that. And that's when I ran away from home. And by fall, I made my way to my grandfather's house. And I remember, my grandfather looking at me saying, "What in the world are you doing here at night?" And I stay there, and I stand there for a few minutes, and I'm like a deer in the headlight, and I finally just started breaking down crying and said, "I'm stupid. I never amount to anything." And he said, "What? Good. Where's this coming from?" So when I explained to him, he sat me down and said, "You have a good heart and a good mind, and you're gonna make a tremendous difference in this world." Told my mother I'm gonna stay there from now on. So that's when I go, and now I'm faced with the heroin den. So they had its own challenges. But, we had a very loving family. I was always surrounded by my aunts and uncles who always poured into me. And my grandfather um, gave me a lifeline. And he wasn't a typical mentor because he spent the most of his adult life in prison. But he was not my biological grandfather, but he cared a great deal about me. So I grew up with this stigma of worrying about that I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. So what I wanted to do is prove to my stepfather that I wasn't dumb. So I started studying the Bible and the encyclopedia. So you would find me either on the porch reading my uncle's World Book encyclopedias or the library a few feet from where I lived. So that year, I got skipped from the fifth to the seventh grade, and I developed this insatiable appetite for learning.
But you were not only learning, but also sort of an entrepreneur. I mean, in the
Yes.
sense of, I just found it fascinating how all these things are sort of pulling at you, like, the crime outside your front door, your grandfather, who really wasn't your grandfather, but treated you as the grandson, and then the kid who's owning a newsstand and skipping grades. I mean, you were a very eclectic and diverse person growing up.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And when I had my newspaper stand, that was a good education in itself because a lot of teachers from Coppin State University, a lot of people in the community would come and give me words of encouragement and teach me how to navigate through the minefields of inner city life.
And from what I can tell, you were fairly introverted, but you were really good at talking to people, which is something that has lasted your entire life, obviously. like, good at diffusing situations, good at sort of figuring out what people wanted, and yet you were an introvert. So how did that happen?
Yes, I was definitely an introvert, but I learned early from being surrounded by, bullies and stick up people, learn how to talk my way out of situations. And that's when I really learned I had to get the gab. But I was always bewildered by the conditions we were living in, why other people live these lives of enchantment and we live under siege. So that really, really affected me growing up.
When you look at that today, does it sometimes you think to yourself, How did I get out of that?"
Oh, absolutely. It was, but it was a different time because I had my grandfather, I had church, and I had a lot of aunts and uncles that were around me all the time, always giving me wisdom. I had, three uncles and aunts and everything, and they were always pouring into me, which is kind of different now. A lot of people don't have, you know, their aunts and uncles around, and my grandfather.
Was this the grandfather who kept your picture in his pocket?
Yes, 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 he did.
Yeah, that
He
was
was he was very proud of me.
I love that, and for anyone
Mhm.
listening or watching, I think it was he was living in West Virginia? What, North Carolina?
Well, he
And
lived in Baltimore and he moved to North Carolina.
right, and he still had your picture in his shirt pocket every single day.
Yes. Yes, he did.
Um, and that's just like that image just really spoke to me about, like, the impact that you had on each other.
Yes, and even when he passed away, sitting in his chair, he still had my picture in his pocket, in his shirt pocket.
I love that. So then somehow you get roped into joining the Marines.
Yes, yes. One thing that happened, I went down with a friend of mine, a high school classmate who was interested in joining the Marines. He asked me to ride with him, to walk down it with him. So I went with him, and the recruiter sees me and he says, "Well, son, I'm glad you want to become a United States Marine." I said, "Sir, I'm not interested. I'm just here with my friend." He said, "That's all well and good, son, but while you're here, I want you to take this test." And I was an introvert and a pretty obedient kid. So yes, sir, I'll take it. Right. So I take the test and I end up joining, and my my high school classmate didn't. Right. So he thought it was hilarious that I did. So that led me to, as an introvert, that was a very interesting experience being in the Marine Corps, particularly training because they single out people like me.
Yeah, you're writing about your experience at Paris Island was just like, "Why am I here?" You know, and being picked on once again by bullies, right?
Yeah, yes, yes. And then the other thing is being told the same thing my stepfather said. You know, you stupid son. You know, you're not cut out for this. And all those same feelings of insecurities coming back because you know, you're not cut out for this, son. There's just something different about you. So I'm like, my God, this man has my number. He know, he knows me. And I'm quiet and awkward a little bit. So they're having a field day with me in Paris Island.
And I mean, it's just funny because you're like, "How did I get here?" You How long did you end up in the Marines for? Like, what was your experience like?
So I went into reserves after training. I went to my military occupational specialty. And then I came home because here's the thing. I was only second male in my family graduate from high school. No person, male in my family, had stepped into college or university. So I wanted the best of both worlds. So I joined the reserves and came back and went to college at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
And I read what happened. For
Yes,
somebody who now has several degrees and is very well educated, what happened?
yes. About a year later, I received what I would describe as the mother of all bombs. I remember sitting there reading this letter and say, "Oh my goodness, I got academically dismissed." My grandfather had warned me. He never gave me a bad piece of advice. He said, "Son, you're working all these jobs. You're not a locomotive, and even those break down." So I stood there staring at that letter. So, oh my God, oh, I hoped to break the generational curse, and now I'm a failure. So that was mentally and emotionally devastating to me.
I am sure. And What sort of inspired you to keep going?
Well, I tell you, I always had in the back of my mind, I wanted to prove my stepfather wrong. So I humbled myself and enrolled in a community college, and I would get there like 5 o'clock in the morning. As soon as the college opened, I would go there and study. And then, I got my groove back, so to speak. I got won, distinguished scholar awards and things like that. So I was like, just like in the Marine Corps, I knew I just couldn't quit. You know, Even when they were telling me, I wasn't cut out for it, I know I just couldn't quit. I couldn't have a lifestyle where I just gave up.
In the midst of all this too, you also get roped into applying to become a member of the police force. A-
Yes,
And it seems, if I'm not a crazy person, there's a repeating behavior here.
you're absolutely correct. And the recruiter, when I went down with my cousin, again, I had no interest whatsoever in law enforcement. And the recruiter said pretty much the same thing. I know you say you're not interested, but while you're here, son, I want you to take this test. We both took the test, and I joined, and he didn't.
So you're thinking to yourself, either I'm a really bad judge of character, or this is
Right.
or this is meant for me, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And I started finding, wow, this is actually my calling. I would never thought, this Steve Urkel type individual joined the military and the police department.
But you did find the thing that really changes your whole life, I guess. 20 years in the police, working with the FBI. Tell me about that experience. I mean, how did it was someplace you never thought you would be.
Yes, well, one thing about this, go back just a little bit. Growing up in Baltimore, watching people shooting up heroin, one experience really changed my life. And these people who were shooting up heroin, they burglarized my mentor's house. And when they're walking back with the merchandise, this 15-year-old kid lifts up his shirt and shows me a gun. And I'm just, I'm terrified by this. And my mentor comes home and she asked me a very simple question: did you see anything? I live directly next to the heroin den. And I hesitated for a minute and I said no. I said no because I was afraid, and I was afraid what they would, do to my family. And that really, really brought me down again, took me to a downward spiral. I felt really bad by myself. Now I'm with the Baltimore City Police Department. And I told my sergeant I'm interested in becoming a detective. He said, "Oh, that's great." The next day, my name was on a list to walk foot patrol in the housing projects, public housing projects. I was like, "Why you do this to me, Sarge?" He laughed at me and said, "Son, your legs are gonna be humongous when you come off that foot beat." So I walk foot patrol in O'Donnell Heights housing projects. I come across a lady who has her head down, and I'm all jovial. I'm like, Yeah, man, how you doing today, ma'am?" And she's like, uh, you know, "Somebody broke into my house and stole my property." So I'm like, "Well, who's investigating your case?" She's investigating the case. No one's investigating the case. I didn't call the police. I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "Why not?" She said, "Y'all don't care about us down here." And I said, "Look at me, ma'am. I care." So I went into her house, and she has two toddlers sitting on the floor, and there's absolutely nothing in the house. I mean, no furniture, no. So I said, "Oh, are you redecorating?" She said, "You don't understand, young man. They took everything: my food, my clothes, my refrigerator ornaments, the laundry detergent, the clothes off the clothing line." Her house was completely cleaned out. So I'm a rookie, but I knew, take preliminary investigative steps, do a neighborhood canvas. And of course, like me, people said they didn't say anything. They didn't see anything. So I'm walking around, and I walk past this house, and I look inside, and lo and behold, I see some of her property. I can still remember to this day. Her refrigerator ornaments look like the sun. Her red leather jacket, so on and so forth. So I could run across the street and I grabbed, and I said, "Can you tell me where this your stuff?" And they said, "Oh my God, it's my stuff." So I tell her, "Go back to her house." I found out who lives there, eventually get a consent search, and regain majority of her property. And I kept milling around the next couple of days asking people, and I found someone that told me where the rest of her property was. It was in the woods. So I come back like Santa Claus the next day with a knapsack of her rest of her stuff, and she is happy. Um, two witnesses came forth who, said that they witnessed the burglary, so made to arrest. And the interesting thing that happened is people in that neighborhood came out and they were like shocked. And the word started getting out there was this rookie patrol officer who cared about people in the community. And they started coming to me with their unreported, unsolved crimes. I would solve their cases for them. And my sergeant said 6 months later, he said, Maurice, who do you know down here? I said, everybody. He said, that was the point. You want to become a detective, you have to know how to interact with people in the community.
How did that make you feel? That at some point in your life, people had said you'll never amount to anything. And then all of a sudden, you're this guy that people trust and they ask for your help. How did that make you feel?
Uh, Euphoric. It was a point of redemption. I started realizing that this was my calling, that this was not an accident. This is, it was my life to be justice, to get justice for people, to be their vehicle for justice and make a difference in people's lives. And it was an excellent feeling.
I'm reading through your book. There are a ton of stories about you doing that, but it's not easy. It's really ugly at times, really
Yes.
hard. I mean, I read the book and I was just like, okay, I don't feel like I want to go to Baltimore right now. It was just, the neighborhoods you were describing, I mean, how'd you keep going?
Knowing the impact it had on people's lives was very rewarding. And people would confide in me about a lot of things. It was a lot of pressure because in the beginning, I'm like, I'm just a kid myself. I'm in my 20s. I'm just really learning life. So, it was, it was really, really, really challenging, but, it was also rewarding. I mean, uh, senior citizens, children, finding their bicycles and, somebody's lawnmower or senior citizens, it was a a feeling of satisfaction and just seeing people's face and, seeing how people could learn to appreciate the police.
And eventually you become that detective, you sergeant, you get assigned to an FBI task force. Um, you really overcame a lot of, you know, the introvert
Mm.
and also horrible racism to like get to where you wanted to be. I mean, I, I read your book and I was just like, this is a great story, about somebody finding what they loved and going.
Yes, it was, like I say, shocking to me and to most of my friends, particularly uh, knowing that I did undercover work for 5 years, which is a joke to a lot of my friends. Like, you're like Urkel, sir, and you working undercover. It's kind of hard to imagine. But, yeah, but again, growing up watching people shoot up heroin, I never thought I would be a narcotics detective, but it was, but it was my calling.
You end up then deciding to pass community college, go to school, go further than that. What sort of drove you past that letter that said, you're dismissed to actually now getting a couple of degrees?
Well, I wanted to be the first person in my family to graduate from college. But I just had this, as I stated earlier, I had this insatiable appetite for learning, and my mother was a teacher, and I had aunts that became teachers, so I knew eventually I would become a teacher. So I worked toward that. But again, I've always loved learning. You know, people in the police department would joke. I joked about another officer. I said, "Have you ever seen anyone who always has their face buried in a book?" He said, "Yeah, you." I said, "Okay." So even studying for the promotional exams, I enjoyed it. Other people, they would complain about it, but I just loved learning.
So the bachelor's criminology, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, that seems a natural. You know,
Yes.
I was thinking you probably knew a lot more at some points than the people in the class.
Well, I was working high profile cases as a student. I'm learning as I go along as a student. Working major narcotics as a student. But I tell you, the irony of it all is, almost 20 years to the day that I got that rejection letter from the University of Maryland, I came back to teach. 20 years later, as a adjunct professor.
You're still teaching, correct?
I've been teaching there almost 25 years.
Do you ever think to yourself, I am now like an adjunct professor for something that I wasn't very good at to begin with? I mean, that's a life turn, right? And
Yes.
do you look at yourself and say, "What, just happened here?"
Yes, yes, indeed. And but University of Maryland Global Campus has really inspired me so much because I took experiential learning and analysis, where you write an experiential learning portfolio for college credit. I took cooperative education, and I would come back and teach those classes as well. Because being an insider, being a student, you really get to understand how to do it, and eventually became a faculty evaluator as well, evaluating experiential learning portfolios in 3 different disciplines. Yes, and a peer mentor. Became a peer mentor for years.
I know I read this in your book. Um, you didn't really tell your wife always what was going on in the police department, you know,
Correct.
um, and I get why, because you you don't want to do that. But how do you sort of make that work? Because you were doing some pretty dangerous things, and you
Yes,
try to protect your family, though.
yes, and that's really difficult because one of the things, 2 things I remember. One thing, I was investigating a serial rapist who was committing rapes in the community in which we were living. So I had to go out at night to try to look for the rapist. And that was horrifying, knowing and leaving my wife and children unprotected. Of course, as you read in the book, I was investigating a kingpin who was believed to be responsible for about 12 murders. And he was killing witnesses and things like that. So it's really difficult, trying to balance that. And I think a lot of people don't think about that, the kind of sacrifice you have to make, decisions you have to make, decisions about your own family, decisions about witnesses. It's a lot. It really is. I can make. I'm in my 20s and early 30s, and I'm making decisions where that could determine whether somebody lives or die. A witness, a reference. So it's a lot of pressure. And you really, yes,
And I found interesting that a lot of the people you talk about were people you knew for long periods of time. They were
yes,
like habitual criminals or whatever you want to call them. It was like they knew you, you knew them, and it was like this long drawn out game in a
yeah,
certain way.
yes,
you know,
yeah.
maybe
Because
it was a chess game. Yeah.
yeah, one day you have a person, they're a suspect, another day they're a witness, another day a shooting victim. It's a really interesting dynamic. So one day they're uh, cursing you out. Next thing you know, you're holding their hand, calling an ambulance for them to save their life. And then, the other interesting dynamic you have, because remember, I'm a patrol officer in this area where I'm doing this major investigation, with homicide and the FBI and stuff. So unlike the FBI, unlike some of the other detectives, I know these kids and I know their parents. So when they see me, Officer Hicks, my son was shot, my son was killed. Ooh, can you help me? So it's for me, it was very personal, and I took it personally. You know, knowing people, and then knowing some of them, try to talking to them, trying to get them out of their life, and then they end up murdered or shot. It's a lot of pressure. Yeah, but you say, but you also save a lot of lives in the process.
But there were definitely people I read about who you're like, that at some point you're going to find them dead. And that was just, you know, it's heartbreaking.
You have to really, evaluate what you're doing, just do the best you can. But again, making important decisions that most people would never want to be involved in, yeah, whether, trying, but, you have, like I had kids when I was a patrol officer that would be shot, and I would see them on the way to school and I'm like, hey, would it hurt you to grab a book? What I mean? One kid told me, said, Officer Hicks, that's all I know is selling drugs. Like, man, you just 16, my friend. You have a lot of skills, So, you do what you can. But again, when you get to know, just like my sergeant told me, once you get to know these people and they trust you, they give you information and sometimes you can make a difference. And there been some kids who I was able to, turn them around.
How did you end up in a private detective agency? How did you end up doing that?
Well, interesting enough, my brother was gunned down in Baltimore at the age of 17. He was one of many homicide victims. And I tell you, I remember I was a lieutenant at the time. I was a commander of robbery and financial crimes, and I would go visit other lieutenants. So I was visiting a lieutenant in Baltimore City, and he took me on a tour of the homicide division, and he slapped the file cap and said, "These are the homicide files. Most of these cases will never be solved." Now I realized that my brother was one of those people in those files. So I tried, I try to make some sort of sense of it, and I start realizing that there's a lot of families who don't have adequate police protection, adequate investigations, done for their family members. So I sought to fill that void because, with being a private investigator. So I was able, as a private investigator, I was able to do some phenomenal things. I had some great success stories as a private investigator, made a significant difference in the lives of people. And I felt I had, again, redemption and sense of purpose.
You're still doing that today?
Yes, yes, I am. I have a real incredible story of someone that I was hired to find a missing person, a person who was she was on heroin, actually on a variety of drugs, and her parents hired me to locate her. The second day she was there, she left the rehab center. Well, they took her to a gym, her and some other people, and they left the gym, got away, and the girl was with her OD'd that day. So she's in Las Vegas from another state, don't have any connections, no money, no ID, no anything, on the street for 2 weeks. Didn't know anyone. So her mother interviewed me and said she could hear the compassion in my voice. She interviewed a lot of private investigators. Um, the fact that I had a background in narcotics was good because her daughter was in the drugs. So she hired me. Then I had 3 daughters. Well, I had 4 daughters. And so anyway, she felt comfortable. So uh, I tracked down. I was tracking down leads. Everybody was an intelligence resource for me. Every homeless person, every vendor on the street, just like as being a walking foot patrol. I had everyone in the intelligence loop. So I got a call. I wouldn't turn my phone off at night. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call, and somebody had found her. So I zoomed out my garage, flew out there and staked out the area, caught her coming out, called, uh, she didn't want to come, so I found out she had a warrant and called the police. They came and took her, and so got her back to her state. It was funny because a guy was trying to pick her up, and I said, "Oh my God." I started blowing a horn and said, "Get away from my wife." So he got scared and left. So 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 I said, I said, I said, "Can I get you a cup of coffee?" He said, "I don't want no cup of coffee." I said, "Look, I'm a private investigator hired by your parents." So when she wouldn't go, I called the police, and then she tried to run. I blocked her from my car. They blocked her. Today, she just opened her second rehab center. She is the owner of 2 rehabs. Yep, she got clean, and she is the owner of 2 rehabs now. I just I just met her. I hadn't seen her in years. I met her mother for the first time face to face. I just got a book award in Phoenix, and I met her and her mother, and it took me on a tour of her rehab facility, the second one that she just opened.
How'd that make you feel? I mean, you made a huge impact in somebody's life. How'd that make you feel?
It made me feel good. And then here's the other thing. I found her on Easter Sunday morning. So every Easter Sunday morning, I get an email from her mother thanking me for finding her daughter. Yeah, so it's a great feeling.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you sort of balance all the dangerous things you've been in and all the horrible things you've
Mhm.
seen with that. It's like two sides of a coin, or it feeds your soul
Yeah.
some way. I mean, it's a lot to handle, but you seem to do it.
Yes, it is. But again, I think my grandfather, very, religious person, gave me a lot of wisdoms. And again, gave me a strong religious foundation, and in Sunday school and church, and that's what really keeps me grounded. And but like I said, it's a lot of responsibility. I mean, I was worried about this lady ODing herself, and some people, they could just bury it and not think about it. But me, I couldn't turn my phone off. And I'm glad I didn't because I got to call 5 a.m.
Yeah, I totally understand that. So, are you still working police work, or it's detective, it's teaching, what else?
Yes, teaching, own a private detective agency and security company here in Maryland, and I do government contract work as well.
So you are busy.
Yes, and still enjoying every minute of it. I love being an investigator, and I love being a teacher.
And is there another book in the works?
Oh, yes, I'm already working on Looking for Trouble 2. I'm about 35% done, the sequel to the first book.
So what's that one gonna be about?
That's gonna pick up, I ended this book as a sergeant. I'm gonna pick up when I'm promoted. I'm a sergeant now, working narcotics, coordinating narcotics investigation to squad and running robbery squad and becoming the commander of robbery. So we're dealing with drugs again and patrol again as well. As a patrol sergeant and catching the bank robbers, and yeah. So all kinds of interesting, yeah, fast-paced cases.
Did you remember all of this, or did you write stuff as you were going? You know what I mean? Like, did you keep a little notebook and over 20 years you how did you recall all of it?
Well, people at the police department used to tease me because I used to have a very good memory. And they would tease me and say, "Ask Hicks anything about the police department. He can even tell you what color the chief underwear." And I don't have my memory is not that good now, but back then it was very good. I remember a lot of details.
I am sure because I read through the book and I was like, this is, you set the scene so well, and the different characters that I was like, wow, you are remembering things that I would I love that. Was there a moment outside of that great detective story in either Baltimore or PG County, like that made you feel just fabulous, doing police work? That time where you thought this is amazing?
Yeah, probably when I arrested this serial rapist who was breaking into people's home. He was a cat burglar, and he would go into their home, take the phone off the hook, deactivate the alarm, then take the phone off the hook so they couldn't call the police. He was masked, and yeah, and catching him, the most, I guess the DMV's most wanted, that was with an AK-47 assault rifle, crossbow with arrows, with the catching with the goods, the mask with the mask, the duct tape, the whole evidence kit was like a career bust, that every detective wants, to catch somebody, Yeah, so that was definitely one of the highlights of my career.
I am sure. And the fact
Yes.
that he was then trying to promote an alarm company to those same people. He had just
Yes.
broken into their house was just like this weird twist that I was like,
Yes. I mean, a a person who's actually committing crimes to create a need for his alarm business. It's shocking.
it was twisted in a way that, I was like, whoa. Looking back now, because you've had a long career, how surprised would that little kid be, who was sitting on the porch, reading or, was bagging in the supermarket? How surprised would that little kid be by what you've done?
Very, very shocked. Yeah, I never imagined in a million years I would be involved in any of this because, I was hoping to become a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I never, thought I'd be involved in the military or police work. Uh, but I just found something that, I just had a calling for, and I had no idea. I was clueless because after leaving Baltimore, I joined Prince George's County Police the same way. I went down my partner with Baltimore. I had no interest in joining the Prince George's County Police Department. Recruiter said the same thing. Son, why you here when you take this test?
If somebody had been going to NASA, you would have gone to NASA and taken a test, right?
Yeah, why they take me to NASA instead?
So we know what you're going to do another book, but you've also gotten a lot of acclaim for this book. Like, tell me about that and how'd that make you feel since it really came out of, you teaching classes and telling people your experiences.
Yes. In December of last year, 2024, Looking for Trouble won an International Impact Book Award, and I went to Phoenix, Arizona to claim the award. It was a great feeling, and I requested, I put the book in for memoir and inspirational stories, and I was really happy because it wanted a children's inspiration motivational category. So a lot of people look at the book as more than just a police book, as an inspirational book. Also, it was listed on Police One as a must-read book for law enforcement by law enforcement in 2024 as well.
So to all those people who said you never amount to anything, ha! Right?
Yes.
Yeah, you have succeeded in, fabulous ways. So congratulations. That's great.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for being here today. And thank you to our listeners and our viewers who watch Unstoppable Stories. If you want more of this content, just subscribe or like our podcasts, and we'll have more for you soon. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you very much for having me.